The static crackled through Major Sarah Chen's headset like angry hornets, each burst of interference a reminder that somewhere in the mountainous terrain below, 12 American soldiers were running out of time. Her fingers hovered over the drone control interface, the blue glow of the tactical display painting shadows across her focused features in the dimly lit command center. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars that seemed too peaceful for what was unfolding 8,000 miles away. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Viper 6, this is Overwatch. We have visual confirmation of hostile movement, approximately 2 clicks northeast of your position. Sarah's voice remained steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach. She could see everything through the drone's infrared camera, the heat signatures moving like ghosts through the Afghan village, the trapped patrol huddled behind the remains of a bombed-out school, and, most crucially, the growing circle of insurgents closing in like wolves around wounded prey. General Marcus Blackwood stood behind her command station, his weathered face etched with the kind of concern that 28 years of military service had taught him to mask but never fully eliminate. His silver hair caught the ambient light from the multiple screens surrounding them, and his presence filled the room with an authority that made junior officers stand a little straighter. Sarah had worked under Blackwood for 3 years, long enough to read the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his hands clasped behind his back when he was calculating acceptable losses. "Major Chen, what's your assessment of the situation?" His voice carried the gravelly undertone of too many years shouting orders across training grounds and too many cigarettes before he'd quit a decade ago. Sarah's eyes never left the screen as she adjusted the drone's altitude, bringing the village into sharper focus. The buildings were a maze of mud brick walls and narrow alleyways, perfect for an ambush, nightmarish for an extraction. "Sir, Bravo Squad is pinned down in Sector 7. They have limited ammunition and no clear exit route. The insurgents are using civilian structures for cover, making traditional air support extremely risky." Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, Sarah's systems operator, leaned forward in her chair, her dark eyes reflecting the cascade of data streaming across her monitors. At 26, she was one of the youngest operators in the unit, but her fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of a concert pianist. Maria had grown up in East Los Angeles, where navigating dangerous situations was a survival skill learned early, and she'd channeled that street-smart awareness into becoming one of the military's most gifted drone technicians. "Major, I'm tracking at least 18 hostile signatures," Maria reported, her voice tight with concentration. "They're coordinating movement patterns, which suggests this isn't opportunistic. They planned this ambush." The third member of Sarah's core team, Captain James Morrison, monitored communications from a stationed position to Sarah's left. His red hair was perpetually disheveled, and his freckled face bore the intense focus of someone who had learned to listen to multiple radio frequencies simultaneously while filtering out the noise that could cost lives. At 31, Morrison was the unit's communications specialist and the closest thing Sarah had to a confidant in the male-dominated world of military drone operations. "Viper 6 is requesting immediate extraction," Morrison announced, pressing one hand to his headset. "Squad leader reports 2 wounded, including their medic. They're running low on medical supplies." General Blackwood moved closer to Sarah's station, and she caught the familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with black coffee, the general's 2 constants regardless of the time of day or crisis at hand. His presence was both reassuring and pressuring. Sarah had earned his respect over the years, but she knew that respect was always subject to review, especially in situations like this where split-second decisions could determine whether soldiers came home alive or in flag-draped coffins. "Major, I need options," Blackwood said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of command responsibility. Sarah's mind raced through tactical scenarios, each one playing out like a chess game, where the pieces were human lives. The Reaper drone, circling high above the village, carried 2 Hellfire missiles, each capable of devastating precision strikes, but the insurgents had positioned themselves strategically among civilian buildings. International rules of engagement were clear about minimizing collateral damage, yet 12 American soldiers were trapped in an increasingly desperate situation. "Sir, I can take out the machine gun nest on the northern roof," Sarah began, her voice measured as she walked through the tactical assessment. That would eliminate their primary suppression fire and give Bravo Squad a corridor to move east toward the extraction point. Negative. Blackwood responded immediately. Intelligence reports indicate that building may house civilians. We can't risk civilian casualties for a maybe scenario. Sarah felt the familiar frustration that came with operating in the gray areas of modern warfare, where the enemy used human shields and international law sometimes felt like it favored those who had no regard for it. She adjusted the drone's camera angle, searching for alternatives, when Maria's sharp intake of breath drew her attention. "Major, look at Sector 4, Maria said, pointing to a heat signature that had just appeared on the thermal display. "That's a child." The infrared image showed a small figure moving between buildings, clearly lost and panicked in the chaos of the firefight. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she watched the child's erratic movement pattern, running toward danger rather than away from it, probably terrified and disoriented by the sound of gunfire echoing off the village walls. "Jesus," Morrison muttered, his usual composure cracking slightly. "Kid can't be more than 8 years old." General Blackwood leaned forward, studying the screen with the calculating gaze that had served him through 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. Sarah watched his reflection in the monitor, noting the way his expression hardened when faced with the impossible choices that defined modern military leadership. "This is exactly why we need boots on the ground for these operations," the general said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Technology can show us what's happening, but it takes a human being to navigate these moral complexities." Sarah bristled at the implication, though she kept her expression neutral. She had heard variations of this argument before, the suggestion that drone warfare was somehow less human, less nuanced than traditional combat. But she had been operating drones for 7 years, and she knew the intimate nature of watching, protecting, and sometimes killing through the electronic eyes of machines that extended her senses across continents. "Sir, with respect, we're human beings making these decisions," Sarah said carefully. "The technology just gives us better information to work with." "Information, yes," Blackwood replied, his tone not quite argumentative but clearly skeptical. "But can you feel the ground shake from incoming mortar rounds? Can you smell the smoke, hear the panic in civilian voices? This is man's work, Major. It requires being physically present to make the right calls." The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow, though she absorbed it without visible reaction. She had heard similar phrases throughout her career, usually delivered with less directness but equal underlying meaning. The suggestion that somehow her gender, combined with her distance from the battlefield, made her less capable of understanding the life-and-death realities of combat operations. Maria and Morrison exchanged glances, both having witnessed similar moments over the years. The 3 of them had developed a professional chemistry that transcended typical military hierarchies. They functioned as a team, with Sarah's strategic thinking balanced by Maria's technical expertise and Morrison's communication skills. But moments like this reminded them all that their competence was sometimes viewed through filters they couldn't control. "Overwatch, this is Viper 6. Situation critical. We have incoming mortar fire and need immediate support." The voice crackling through Morrison's headset belonged to Staff Sergeant David Park, the squad leader whose calm professionalism under fire had earned him 2 Bronze Stars and the respect of every soldier who had served with him. Sarah refocused on the tactical display, pushing aside the general's comment and the frustration it generated. 12 soldiers needed her complete attention, not her wounded pride. She traced the insurgent movement patterns on the screen, noting how they were tightening the noose around Bravo Squad's position. "I can use the drone's laser designator to guide precision strikes from the AC-130 circling at 20,000 feet, Sarah proposed. "Minimize our missile usage and provide continuous fire support during the extraction." "The Spooky is 15 minutes out," Morrison reported, referring to the gunship by its nickname. "Viper 6 doesn't have 15 minutes. The mathematics of the situation were brutal and simple. Each passing minute reduced the squad's ammunition reserves, increased the likelihood of more serious casualties, and gave the insurgents more time to coordinate a final assault. Sarah watched the thermal images on her screen, seeing the story unfold in real-time heat signatures and digital overlays that represented human lives hanging in the balance. "There," Maria said suddenly, pointing to a section of the village that had been obscured by smoke from a burning vehicle. "I've got a clear shot at their command position. 2-story building, southeast corner. No civilian signatures in the immediate area." Sarah studied the target Maria had identified. The building showed multiple heat signatures clustered around what appeared to be communication equipment, likely the coordination center for the insurgent attack. Taking out their command structure could disrupt their tactical coordination long enough for Bravo Squad to break contact and reach the extraction point. It's risky, Sarah said, thinking aloud, if we're wrong about civilian presence or if they're using the building as a civilian shelter. Major, General Blackwood interjected, his voice carrying the authority of command decision. I'll take responsibility for the call. Sometimes leadership means making the hard choices, so others don't have to. The implications stung, that Sarah wasn't prepared to make difficult decisions, that she needed male authority to provide cover for choices that combat required. She had made life-and-death decisions dozens of times over her career, had saved countless lives through precise drone strikes and surveillance operations. Yet somehow, her competence was perpetually under evaluation in ways that her male counterparts rarely experienced. Sir, I've been making hard choices in this job for 7 years, Sarah replied, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made Morrison glance nervously between her and the general. I'm not asking for cover. I'm ensuring we have accurate intelligence before we act. The tension in the command center became palpable, with Maria focusing intently on her screens to avoid getting caught in the crossfire of the exchange. The general's expression hardened slightly, and Sarah realized she had crossed a line, not necessarily in terms of military protocol, but in challenging the underlying assumptions about her role and capabilities. Very well, Major, Blackwood said finally. What's your recommendation? Sarah took a deep breath, pushing aside the personal dynamics and focusing on the tactical situation. She studied the target building once more, cross-referencing the thermal imaging with the village layout intelligence they had received during mission briefing. The structure showed no signs of civilian occupation, and the heat signatures inside were clearly military-age males engaged in coordinated activity. I recommend we take the shot, Sarah said. Target shows no civilian presence, and eliminating their command structure gives Bravo Squad the best chance of successful extraction. Authorized, General Blackwood replied immediately. Take the shot. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision across the control interface, arming the Hellfire missile and establishing target lock on the building Maria had identified. The laser designator painted an invisible mark on the structure, and the missile's guidance system confirmed target acquisition. Everything was ready, except for one final authorization protocol that required voice confirmation of the strike order. Viper 6, be advised, Hellfire inbound on target building southeast sector, Sarah announced into her headset. Take cover and prepare for immediate movement post-impact. Copy, Overwatch, standing by. Sarah's finger hovered over the final authorization button, a small red switch that would send 18 pounds of high-explosive warhead across 8,000 miles to eliminate a threat and hopefully save American lives. She had pressed similar buttons dozens of times, but each decision carried the weight of permanent consequences. Lives ended, geopolitical implications, and the knowledge that every missile launched would be analyzed, criticized, and second-guessed by commanders, politicians, and historians. Major, we're running out of time, General Blackwood said quietly. The words broke her concentration, and Sarah realized she had been hesitating. Not from uncertainty about the tactical situation, but from the accumulated weight of operating in an environment where her competence was constantly questioned, despite her proven track record. She pushed the thought aside and pressed the authorization button. Missile away, she announced. The Hellfire missile streaked across the Afghan sky, its progress tracked by both the launching drone and satellite reconnaissance systems that provided redundant confirmation of impact trajectory. Sarah watched the countdown timer on her screen. 37 seconds until impact, 37 seconds during which she could only hope that her analysis had been correct, that no civilians had moved into the target area, that the intelligence assessment had been accurate. Impact in 10 seconds, Maria announced, her voice tense with concentration. Sarah watched the thermal display, noting how the insurgent heat signatures had spread throughout the village in what appeared to be preparation for a final assault on Bravo Squad's position. The timing of the missile strike would be crucial. Too early, and the insurgents could regroup. Too late, and the trapped soldiers might not survive long enough to benefit from the tactical advantage. 5, 4, 3, 2, impact. The building disappeared in a flash of white on the thermal display, the explosion's heat signature blooming across Sarah's screen like a deadly flower. Secondary explosions followed immediately, indicating that the structure had contained ammunition or fuel supplies. The insurgent heat signatures throughout the village suddenly stopped their coordinated movement, their command structure eliminated in a single precise strike. Direct hit, Maria reported. Multiple secondary explosions, target destroyed. Viper 6, this is Overwatch, target eliminated. You have approximately 30 seconds before they reorganize. Move now. Copy Overwatch, Viper 6 moving to extraction point. Sarah watched the heat signatures representing Bravo Squad emerge from their defensive position and begin moving through the village toward the designated extraction zone. The insurgent signatures remained scattered and disorganized, their tactical coordination broken by the loss of their command center. For the first time in 2 hours, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about the squad's chances of reaching safety. But as she continued monitoring the extraction, Sarah noticed something troubling on the thermal display. 3 new heat signatures had appeared near the extraction point, signatures that hadn't been there during the initial reconnaissance. The shapes and movement patterns suggested they were armed individuals taking position to ambush Bravo Squad as they approached what they believed would be safety. "Maria, are you seeing Sector 9?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with concern. "Confirmed. 3 new hostiles at the LZ. They're setting up an ambush." The tactical situation had shifted once again, presenting Sarah with another life-or-death decision. Bravo Squad was moving toward what they thought was a clear extraction point, unaware that insurgents had repositioned to intercept them. Sarah had 1 missile remaining, enough to eliminate the ambush threat, but doing so would leave the drone without offensive capabilities for any additional threats that might emerge. Viper 6, be advised we have hostile signatures at your extraction point, Sarah transmitted. 3 individuals in ambush position. Copy Overwatch. Can you clear the LZ? Sarah looked at the tactical display, calculating angles and collateral damage risks. The 3 insurgents were positioned near what appeared to be an abandoned market stall, with no civilian structures in the immediate area. It was a clean shot, but it would expend her last missile, leaving Bravo Squad without air support if additional threats emerged during the extraction. General Blackwood moved closer to Sarah's station, studying the same tactical information she was analyzing. His presence felt different now, less supportive and more supervisory, as if her previous hesitation had raised questions about her decisiveness under pressure. "Major, what's your assessment?" he asked. "Clean shot, minimal collateral damage risk," Sarah replied, "but it's our last missile. If additional threats emerge during extraction, we'll be limited to surveillance support only." "The extraction helicopter is still 12 minutes out," Morrison added. "That's a long time to hold a position without air support." Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her once again. Save the missile for potential future threats, risking that Bravo Squad would walk into an ambush, or eliminate the immediate threat and hope no additional challenges emerged during the lengthy wait for helicopter extraction. "Sometimes you have to trust your instincts," General Blackwood said quietly, his words carrying layered meaning that Sarah couldn't quite decipher. She studied the tactical display one more time, noting the positioning of the ambush team and the route Bravo Squad would take to reach the extraction point. The insurgents had chosen their position well. They would have clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes if the ambush was successful. Bravo Squad would be vulnerable and exposed, carrying wounded team members and exhausted from hours of combat. The decision crystallized in Sarah's mind with sudden clarity. She had spent her entire career learning to read tactical situations, to calculate risks and benefits, to make life-and-death choices based on incomplete information and time pressure. Her instincts, honed by thousands of hours of drone operations and combat experience, told her that eliminating the immediate threat was the correct choice. "Target acquired," Sarah announced, establishing missile lock on the ambush position. "Viper 6, second Hellfire inbound on LZ hostiles, ETA 45 seconds. She pressed the authorization button without hesitation this time, her confidence restored by the clarity of the tactical situation. The second missile streaked across the Afghan sky while Sarah maintained continuous surveillance of both the target area and Bravo Squad's approach route. Impact in 10, 5, impact. The 3 insurgent heat signatures vanished in another white flash on the thermal display, their ambush position eliminated with surgical precision. Sarah immediately refocused the drone's camera on Bravo Squad's position, noting that the soldiers had taken cover during the missile strike and were now resuming their movement toward the extraction point. LZ clear, Maria reported. No hostile signatures in the immediate area. Viper 6, this is Overwatch. LZ is clear, continue to extraction point. Copy Overwatch, ETA to LZ 3 minutes. Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease as she watched Bravo Squad's heat signatures moving steadily towards safety. The tactical situation had stabilized, with no immediate threats visible on the thermal display and the extraction helicopter approaching on schedule. For the first time since the crisis began, she allowed herself to believe that all 12 soldiers would make it home alive. But as she continued monitoring the situation, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. A new cluster of heat signatures had appeared on the edge of her surveillance area, at least 6 individuals moving in coordinated formation toward the extraction point. They were still 15 minutes away from Bravo Squad's position, but their movement pattern and timing suggested they were responding to the missile strikes and attempting to intercept the American soldiers before helicopter extraction could be completed. "We've got company," Sarah announced, her voice grim. 6+ hostiles approaching from the west, ETA to LZ approximately 15 minutes. "Extraction helicopter is still 8 minutes out," Morrison reported. "They're going to be cutting it close." General Blackwood studied the new threat assessment with the calculating gaze that had defined his military career. Sarah watched his reflection in her monitor, noting the way he weighed various tactical options with the detachment that senior officers developed as a psychological survival mechanism. "Major, you've expended both missiles," the general observed. "What capabilities do we have remaining?" Sarah's mind raced through the available options. The drone carried sophisticated surveillance equipment and communication gear, but no additional offensive weapons. The AC-130 gunship was still too far away to provide immediate fire support, and conventional artillery was ruled out due to the proximity of civilian structures. "We have the laser designator," Sarah replied. "If we can get fast-mover aircraft in the area, we can guide precision strikes. But coordination time would be at least 20 minutes. "Too long," Morrison said. "Bravo Squad needs immediate support." Sarah felt the familiar frustration of operating with limited resources in a rapidly evolving tactical situation. Modern drone warfare provided unprecedented surveillance capabilities and precision strike options, but it also created situations where operators could see threats developing without having adequate means to address them. As she watched the new insurgent force approaching the extraction point, Sarah realized that Bravo Squad's survival might depend on decisions and capabilities that extended far beyond her control station. The general's earlier comments about man's work and the need for physical presence on the battlefield suddenly seemed less like casual chauvinism and more like tactical philosophy that might determine whether 12 soldiers lived or died. But even as doubt crept into her mind, Sarah's training and experience reasserted themselves. She had successfully eliminated 2 critical threats, provided crucial intelligence support, and guided Bravo Squad through the most dangerous phase of their extraction. Whatever challenges remained, she was determined to see the mission through to completion. "Viper 6 be advised. Additional hostile force approaching from the west," Sarah transmitted. 6+ individuals, ETA 15 minutes. Expedite movement to LZ. Copy Overwatch. Moving as fast as we can with wounded. Sarah adjusted the drone's flight pattern to maintain surveillance of both Bravo Squad and the approaching threat force, her hands moving across the control interface with practiced efficiency. Whatever happened in the next 20 minutes, she was determined that no one would be able to say that gender or remote operation had compromised her ability to protect American soldiers in harm's way. The countdown continued, with multiple variables converging toward a conclusion that would determine not only the fate of 12 soldiers, but also Sarah's own understanding of her role, capabilities, and place in the complex machinery of modern military operations. This section establishes the hook with mid-crisis action, introduces our main characters, Sarah, General Blackwood, Maria Rodriguez, and Captain Morrison, reveals the gender dynamics and tension around drone warfare capabilities, and ends with an escalating situation where Sarah's competence and the question of man's work versus technological precision will be tested. The section establishes both the immediate tactical crisis and the underlying themes that will drive the story forward. Sarah Chen's days began at 0430 hours with the same ritual she had maintained for 7 years of military service, a 5-mile run through the Nevada desert that surrounded Creech Air Force Base, followed by precisely 30 minutes of meditation in her sparsely furnished base housing unit. The meditation wasn't some New Age affectation. It was a survival mechanism she had developed after her 3rd year of drone operations, when the accumulated weight of remote warfare had begun manifesting in sleepless nights and recurring dreams of thermal images that moved like ghosts across her closed eyelids. The daughter of Taiwanese immigrants who had built a successful medical practice in San Francisco's Richmond district, Sarah had grown up understanding that excellence was expected, not exceptional. Her father, Dr. Michael Chen, was a cardiovascular surgeon whose steady hands had saved thousands of lives over a 30-year career. Her mother, Dr. Lisa Chen, was a pediatrician whose gentle demeanor masked an iron determination that had carried her through medical school as one of only 3 women in her class at Stanford in 1985. Sarah's decision to join the Air Force after completing her aerospace engineering degree at MIT had puzzled her parents, who had assumed their daughter would follow them into medicine or perhaps pursue advanced degrees that would lead to a prestigious civilian career. But Sarah had been drawn to the precision and responsibility of military aviation, initially hoping to become a fighter pilot before discovering that her true calling lay in the emerging field of unmanned aerial systems. Her apartment on base reflected the disciplined minimalism that characterized much of her life. The furniture was standard military issue, functional and unremarkable. The only personal touches were a small collection of books on military history and aviation technology, a single photograph of her parents at their medical practice, and a carefully maintained bonsai tree that she had been nurturing for 6 years. The bonsai required daily attention, precise watering, careful pruning, constant monitoring of light and temperature conditions, which Sarah found oddly parallel to the demands of drone operation. The contradiction that defined Sarah's existence was the relationship between her role as a remote warrior and her fundamental nature as someone who sought to protect and preserve life. Every missile she launched was fired with the intention of saving American soldiers or preventing terrorist attacks, yet each strike also represented a moment of destruction that she carried with her long after the tactical situation had resolved. She had killed 43 people over her 7-year career. She kept an exact count, not from any morbid fascination, but because she believed that taking a life, even from 8,000 miles away, required acknowledgement and remembrance. Her colleagues at Creech knew her as competent, reliable, and unflappable under pressure, but they saw only the professional facade that Sarah had carefully constructed over years of operating in a predominantly male environment. They didn't know that she volunteered at the Las Vegas Children's Hospital every weekend, reading to young patients and helping with art therapy programs. They didn't know that she sent anonymous donations to schools and villages where her drone strikes had caused collateral damage, or that she had learned to speak basic Pashto and Arabic, so she could better understand intercepted communications and civilian conversations in her areas of operation. The kindness that defined Sarah's core identity often felt at odds with her professional responsibilities, creating an internal tension that she managed through compartmentalization and ritual. After particularly difficult missions, she would spend hours researching the backgrounds of the people she had killed, trying to understand their motivations and circumstances. It wasn't guilt exactly. She remained convinced that her actions saved more lives than they cost, but rather a sense of responsibility for the full human impact of her decisions. Her dreams had evolved over the years, from typical anxiety manifestations to complex narratives that blended her childhood memories with scenes from military operations. She would dream of her mother's gentle hands treating sick children, then transition seamlessly to images of her own hands operating drone controls, the two actions somehow connected in ways her conscious mind couldn't fully articulate. The dreams weren't nightmares in the traditional sense, but rather profound explorations of identity and purpose that left her contemplating the relationship between healing and protecting, nurturing and defending. Sarah's greatest fear wasn't death or injury, occupational hazards that she had accepted when she chose military service, but rather the possibility that her gender and remote operating position would be used to diminish or dismiss her contributions to mission success. She had watched male colleagues receive commendations for achievements that seemed less significant than operations she had conducted, had endured comments about women being naturally suited for drone work because it didn't require physical strength, and had noticed that her tactical recommendations were often questioned more thoroughly than those of her male counterparts. The comment General Blackwood had made about man's work wasn't the first such observation she had encountered, nor would it be the last. But it had stung particularly sharply because she respected the general's experience and had hoped that her track record of successful operations would speak louder than the underlying biases that seemed to persist, regardless of demonstrated competence. The suggestion that remote operations somehow reduced the human element of combat decisions revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what drone warfare actually required. Not less humanity, but perhaps more, as operators had to maintain emotional connection to life and death decisions across vast distances and cultural divides. Maria Rodriguez had become Sarah's closest friend at Creech, partly because they were two of the few women in their unit, but primarily because Maria possessed an intuitive understanding of technology that complemented Sarah's strategic thinking. Maria's background in East Los Angeles had taught her to read situations quickly and accurately, skills that translated perfectly to the complex information management requirements of drone operations. She could detect patterns in data streams that others missed, anticipate technical problems before they became critical, and maintain steady performance under pressure that would break less experienced operators. Their friendship had developed gradually over 18 months of working together, built on shared experiences of proving themselves in an environment where competence was constantly questioned, and where a single mistake could be magnified into evidence of broader inadequacy. They rarely discussed the gender dynamics of their workplace directly, but they had developed a subtle communication system that allowed them to support each other through difficult moments without drawing attention to the challenges they faced. Captain Morrison represented a different kind of professional relationship for Sarah, a male colleague who seemed genuinely committed to evaluating people based on their contributions rather than their demographics. His technical expertise in communication systems made him an invaluable team member, and his easygoing personality helped diffuse tensions that sometimes arose during high-stress operations. Sarah trusted Morrison's judgment and appreciated his ability to provide honest feedback without the underlying skepticism she encountered from some of her other colleagues. The three of them had developed an effective operational chemistry over the past year, with Sarah providing strategic oversight, Maria managing technical systems, and Morrison coordinating communications. Their success rate on assigned missions was among the highest in their unit, a fact that Sarah took quiet pride in while remaining aware that their achievements were often attributed to luck, good intelligence, or favorable circumstances rather than their skill and teamwork. Sarah's relationship with her parents had become increasingly complex as her military career progressed. They were proud of her service and respected her dedication to protecting American interests, but they struggled to understand the moral and ethical dimensions of remote warfare. Her father, whose medical training emphasized the sanctity of life, sometimes asked questions about civilian casualties that Sarah found difficult to answer. Her mother worried about the psychological impact of her daughter's responsibilities, comparing them to the emotional challenges faced by emergency room physicians who had to make life and death decisions under time pressure. During her monthly phone calls home, Sarah found herself editing her experiences, sharing the technical achievements and career milestones while omitting the details of specific operations and their human costs. She wanted to protect her parents from the full reality of her work, but she also struggled with the isolation that came from being unable to fully share the experiences that defined most of her waking hours. The compartmentalization that served her professionally sometimes made it difficult to maintain authentic personal relationships. The contradiction between her public role as a precise, emotionally controlled military operator and her private identity as someone deeply concerned with human welfare created an ongoing tension that Sarah managed through careful routine and deliberate self-care practices. Her morning runs provided physical release for stress that she couldn't express professionally. Her meditation helped her process the emotional complexity of her responsibilities without becoming overwhelmed by them. Her weekend volunteer work offered a direct way to contribute positively to civilian life, balancing the destructive aspects of her military duties. But the most challenging aspect of Sarah's professional life was the constant need to prove herself in situations where her male colleagues' competence was assumed rather than demonstrated. She had learned to navigate the subtle dynamics of military meetings, where her suggestions were initially dismissed only to be embraced when reintroduced by male officers. She had developed strategies for presenting tactical recommendations in ways that minimized the likelihood of gender-based skepticism. She had mastered the delicate balance between confidence and deference that seemed necessary for women to advance in military leadership roles. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that her role as a drone operator required exactly the kinds of skills that traditional gender stereotypes associated with women: attention to detail, multitasking ability, emotional intelligence for reading complex situations, and patience for long periods of observation and analysis. Yet these same qualities were somehow viewed as less valuable than the physical courage and aggressive instincts that characterize traditional concepts of military service. Her career aspirations extended beyond her current role as a major in drone operations. Sarah hoped eventually to advance to senior leadership positions where she could influence military policy and help develop the next generation of unmanned systems technology. She had begun taking advanced courses in international relations and strategic studies, preparing for roles that would require broader understanding of geopolitical dynamics. But she was also realistic about the challenges facing women who sought senior military leadership positions, particularly in emerging fields like cyber and drone warfare, where traditional assumptions about combat experience might not apply. The personal cost of maintaining professional excellence while navigating gender dynamics was something Sarah rarely acknowledged, even to herself. She had learned to absorb criticism and skepticism without visible reaction, to accept that her achievements might be diminished or questioned in ways that her male colleagues didn't experience, and to find satisfaction in mission success even when individual recognition was elusive. The psychological resilience required for this ongoing challenge was perhaps as demanding as the tactical requirements of drone warfare itself. As Sarah prepared for another day of operations, reviewing intelligence briefings and checking equipment status, she carried with her the accumulated weight of 7 years of proving herself repeatedly in situations where proof should have been unnecessary. The skills she had developed, the lives she had saved, and the tactical successes she had achieved formed a record of competence that spoke for itself, yet somehow that record required constant defense and revalidation. The morning briefing would bring new challenges and opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities, new chances to save American lives through precise application of remote warfare technology, and new moments where her gender and operating method might be questioned despite her proven track record. Sarah approached these challenges with the same disciplined determination that characterized her morning runs and meditation practice, focused on the mission, committed to excellence, and quietly determined to prove that effective military leadership had nothing to do with traditional concepts of man's work and everything to do with skill, judgment, and dedication to protecting those who served. This section explores Sarah's background, daily routines, internal contradictions between her protective nature and warrior role, family relationships, challenges with gender bias, and her deep competence despite constant questioning. It establishes the emotional foundation that will drive her character through the escalating conflicts ahead. The weeks following the successful Bravo Squad extraction should have marked a professional high point for Sarah Chen and her team. Instead, they found themselves navigating an increasingly complex landscape of institutional scrutiny, policy debates, and subtle professional undermining that threatened to overshadow their tactical achievements. The 3 successful missile strikes that had saved 12 American lives became the subject of intensive after-action reviews, congressional briefings, and strategic assessments that seemed more focused on questioning methodology than celebrating results. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the newly appointed Director of Unmanned Systems Operations, arrived at Creech Air Force Base on a Tuesday morning in late September with a mandate to review drone operational procedures and implement what Pentagon officials euphemistically termed enhanced oversight protocols. Hayes was a career fighter pilot with 3 combat tours and a reputation for demanding absolute adherence to established procedures. Her appointment represented the Air Force's response to growing congressional pressure for greater accountability in drone warfare, particularly regarding civilian casualty avoidance and rules of engagement compliance. Sarah first encountered Colonel Hayes during a mandatory all-hands briefing in the base's largest conference room, where more than 200 drone operators, analysts, and support personnel gathered to hear the new director outline her vision for the program's future. Hayes was a compact woman in her mid-40s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun and pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Ladies and gentlemen, drone operations have reached a critical juncture in their evolution as a military capability, Hayes began, her words echoing through the silent auditorium. We have proven the tactical effectiveness of unmanned systems, but we now face questions about strategic implementation, ethical frameworks, and operational accountability that require immediate attention. Sarah listened with growing unease as Hayes outlined new requirements for pre-strike authorization, expanded documentation protocols, and what she termed enhanced human oversight of autonomous systems. The implications were clear. Drone operations would become significantly more bureaucratic, with additional layers of approval required for time-sensitive tactical decisions. Effective immediately, all drone strikes requiring civilian casualty assessments will undergo mandatory review by a 3-person authorization board, Hayes announced. This board will include a senior operations officer, a legal affairs representative, and a civilian oversight coordinator from the Department of Defense. Maria shifted uncomfortably in her seat beside Sarah, and Captain Morrison let out a barely audible sigh that captured the sentiment rippling through the assembled personnel. The new protocols would add precious minutes to authorization processes that often needed to be completed in seconds. Lives could be lost while paperwork was being processed and reviewed by officials who had never operated a drone or made split-second tactical decisions under combat pressure. After the briefing, Sarah found herself walking across the base with General Blackwood, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet during Hayes' presentation. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly, creating heat shimmers that distorted the horizon and made the distant mountains appear to dance in the thermal currents. The general's usually confident stride seemed somehow heavier, burdened by concerns that extended beyond the immediate challenges of the new oversight protocols. "Major Chen, I want your honest assessment of these new procedures," Blackwood said as they approached the operations center. His voice carried a weariness that Sarah had never heard before, as if the accumulated weight of command responsibility was finally beginning to show. "Sir, with respect, they're going to get people killed," Sarah replied without hesitation. "The 3-person authorization board might work for planned strikes against fixed targets, but it's completely inadequate for dynamic situations like the Bravo squad extraction. By the time we get approval from 3 different offices, the tactical situation will have changed completely." Blackwood nodded grimly, his expression confirming that he shared her concerns. "The political pressure is enormous, Major. Congress wants accountability, the media wants transparency, and civilian leadership wants assurance that we're not creating more problems than we're solving. But I agree that these protocols could compromise our ability to respond effectively to emergency situations." As they entered the air-conditioned operations center, Sarah felt the familiar tension of walking into an environment where her every decision would be scrutinized, documented, and potentially second-guessed by people who had never faced the responsibility of protecting soldiers in combat. The banks of monitors and control stations that had once felt like extensions of her tactical awareness now seemed like instruments of surveillance, recording every keystroke and command for future review and analysis. The first major test of the new protocols came 3 days later, when a Marine reconnaissance unit operating near the Pakistani border found themselves pinned down by a well-coordinated insurgent force. The tactical situation was similar to the Bravo squad crisis. Americans trapped in an unfavorable position, hostile forces maneuvering for advantage, and limited time for effective intervention. But this time, Sarah and her team faced the additional challenge of navigating the new authorization requirements while soldiers were dying. "Overwatch, this is Recon 7. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions and have 2 urgent casualties requiring immediate medical evacuation." The voice crackling through Morrison's headset belonged to Gunnery Sergeant Mike Torres, a 20-year Marine veteran whose calm professionalism under fire had earned him the respect of every unit he had served with. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the insurgent positions and the Marines' limited options for movement or defense. The enemy had learned from previous engagements, positioning themselves in locations that made precision strikes challenging, while maximizing their own tactical advantages. It was a complex situation that required immediate response, but the new protocols demanded comprehensive analysis and multi-level approval before any offensive action could be authorized. "Maria, I need threat assessment and civilian casualty evaluation on all hostile positions," Sarah ordered, her hands moving across the control interface to gather the intelligence required for the authorization board. "Morrison, establish contact with the Legal Affairs Office and the Civilian Oversight Coordinator. We need the full authorization panel online immediately." The next 20 minutes unfolded like a bureaucratic nightmare played out against the backdrop of human suffering. Sarah provided detailed tactical analysis to the authorization board via secure video conference, answering questions about target identification, collateral damage assessment, and alternative response options while watching Marine heat signatures on her display grow weaker and more scattered. The insurgents were tightening their noose around the trapped reconnaissance unit, and every minute of delay increased the likelihood that the rescue mission would become a recovery operation. Major Chen, have you considered using non-lethal suppression methods to achieve tactical objectives without risking civilian casualties? Asked Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the civilian oversight coordinator whose previous experience included 5 years with a Washington think tank specializing in conflict resolution. Her question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the tactical realities facing the trapped Marines, but Sarah forced herself to respond professionally despite her growing frustration. "Ma'am, the insurgent forces are using military-grade weapons and coordinated tactics. Non-lethal suppression would be ineffective against determined combatants and would likely result in additional American casualties," Sarah explained, her voice carefully controlled despite the urgency she felt. "Nevertheless, we must consider all options before authorizing lethal force," Walsh replied. "The political implications of civilian casualties in this region could undermine broader strategic objectives." Sarah felt her professional composure beginning to crack as she watched the Marine positions on her tactical display. 2 of the heat signatures had gone stationary, indicating either death or severe injury, and the remaining Marines were running critically low on ammunition. The authorization board was debating theoretical policy implications while American servicemen were bleeding out in the Afghan mountains. "Overwatch, this is Recon 7. We have lost contact with 2 team members and are down to less than 50 rounds of ammunition. Request immediate fire support." Torres's voice carried the controlled desperation of a professional soldier who understood that his unit was running out of time and options. "Recon 7, we are working authorization for immediate fire support. Stand by," Sarah replied, hating the words even as she spoke them. She had never before been forced to ask soldiers to stand by while their lives hung in the balance, and bureaucrats debated policy implications. The authorization process dragged on for another 12 minutes, while Sarah provided additional analysis, answered follow-up questions, and submitted supplementary documentation that seemed designed more to create legal cover than to save lives. When approval finally came, it was conditioned on using the smallest possible warhead size and accepting additional restrictions that limited her tactical flexibility. "Authorization granted for single Hellfire strike on primary target only," announced Major Robert Coleman, the legal affairs representative. "Collateral damage must be minimized, and no follow-up strikes are authorized without returning to the full authorization process." Sarah immediately established target lock on the insurgent machine gun position that posed the greatest threat to the trapped Marines. The missile streaked across the Afghan sky and eliminated the target with surgical precision, creating an opportunity for the reconnaissance unit to move to better defensive positions. But the tactical situation remained critical, with multiple insurgent forces still maneuvering to complete their encirclement of the Marine position. "Recon 7, primary threat eliminated. Move to defensive position Alpha," Sarah transmitted. "Moving to Alpha." "Overwatch, we still have multiple hostiles approaching from the east. Request additional fire support." Sarah studied her tactical display, identifying 3 additional targets that posed immediate threats to the Marine unit. But engaging those targets would require returning to the authorization process, losing precious time while the tactical situation continued to deteriorate. The new protocols had created a situation where she could save some American lives, but not all of them, because bureaucratic procedures prevented the kind of rapid, flexible response that dynamic combat situations required. "Request denied," came the response from the authorization board. "Insufficient justification for additional strikes given current civilian casualty risk assessment." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had provided clear tactical analysis demonstrating the continued threat to American forces, had identified targets with minimal civilian risk, and had requested authorization to complete a rescue mission that was still in progress. But the authorization board had decided that policy considerations outweighed tactical necessities, leaving her to watch American servicemen fight for their lives without the support she was capable of providing. Over the next 40 minutes, Sarah and her team provided surveillance and communications support, while Recon 7 fought a running battle through mountainous terrain toward an extraction point. 2 more Marines were wounded during the movement, and the unit lost most of their heavy equipment while evading pursuit by insurgent forces that Sarah could have eliminated with precision strikes if the authorization protocols had permitted rapid response. The extraction helicopter finally arrived to pull out the surviving Marines, but what should have been a successful rescue operation had become a near disaster that cost 3 American lives and could have been prevented with appropriate air support. Sarah knew that her single authorized missile strike had saved the remaining Marines from complete annihilation, but she also knew that the restrictive protocols had prevented her from saving everyone. In the aftermath of the operation, Sarah found herself called to an after-action review with Colonel Hayes, General Blackwood, and representatives from the Authorization Board. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room where the human cost of bureaucratic procedures could be discussed in abstract terms without confronting the reality of American casualties that might have been prevented. Major Chen, your performance during this operation was professionally adequate, but I have concerns about your apparent resistance to the new authorization protocols. Colonel Hayes began, her pale blue eyes fixed on Sarah with prosecutorial intensity. Your repeated requests for additional strike authorization suggest an aggressive mindset that may be inappropriate for current strategic objectives. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to respond with the professional restraint that had served her throughout her military career. Ma'am, my requests were based on tactical analysis indicating continued threats to American forces. The insurgents maintained the capability to inflict additional casualties on Recon 7 throughout their movement to the extraction point. Nevertheless, the Authorization Board determined that the risk of civilian casualties outweighed the tactical benefits of additional strikes, Hayes replied. Our mission includes protecting civilian populations as well as American forces, and sometimes those objectives require difficult choices. With respect, Colonel, 3 Marines died because we couldn't provide adequate fire support, Sarah said, her voice carrying an edge that made General Blackwood shift uncomfortably in his chair. Those weren't difficult choices. They were preventable casualties caused by inappropriate restrictions on tactical response capabilities. The tension in the room became palpable as Sarah's challenge to the new protocols was met with institutional resistance that seemed more concerned with policy compliance than mission effectiveness. Colonel Hayes's expression hardened, and Sarah realized that she had crossed a line that might have professional consequences extending far beyond the current discussion. Major Chen, your attitude suggests that you may not be suited for the evolving requirements of modern drone operations, Hayes said coldly. Perhaps a transfer to a position with less tactical responsibility would be more appropriate for someone who struggles with authorization procedures. The threat was clear, and Sarah felt the familiar sense of professional vulnerability that came from challenging institutional decisions as a woman in a male-dominated military environment. Her competence was being questioned not because of tactical failures, but because she had advocated for the operational flexibility necessary to save American lives. General Blackwood intervened before Sarah could respond, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had watched too many good officers destroyed by bureaucratic politics. Colonel Hayes, Major Chen has the highest mission success rate in this unit and has saved more American lives than any other drone operator under my command. Her tactical judgment has been proven repeatedly under combat conditions. General Blackwood, I appreciate Major Chen's past performance, but we must adapt to new strategic realities, Hayes replied. The old ways of conducting drone operations created political problems that threatened the entire program. We need operators who understand that tactical effectiveness must be balanced against strategic considerations. Sarah listened to the exchange with growing frustration as her professional competence became a political football in debates about policy implementation and bureaucratic control. The 3 Marines who had died during the Recon 7 operation were being reduced to acceptable losses in pursuit of broader strategic objectives that seemed more concerned with avoiding congressional criticism than winning battles. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself subjected to increased scrutiny of her operations, with every tactical decision reviewed and analyzed by multiple oversight bodies that seemed more interested in finding fault than understanding context. Her mission assignments were reduced in scope and complexity, limiting her to routine surveillance operations that didn't require the kind of split-second decision-making that had defined her career. The psychological impact of the new restrictions extended beyond professional frustration to a deeper sense of betrayal by an institution that had once valued her contributions. Sarah had spent 7 years developing skills and judgment that saved American lives, only to find herself marginalized because she advocated for operational effectiveness over bureaucratic compliance. Maria and Morrison watched their teammates' struggles with growing concern, recognizing that the institutional response to the Recon 7 operation was undermining the confidence and capabilities of one of their most effective operators. The team chemistry that had made them so successful was being eroded by policies that seemed designed to prevent the kind of tactical flexibility that modern warfare required. "This is insane," Maria said during one of their informal conversations in the operations center break room. "They're punishing Sarah for being good at her job and caring about the soldiers she's supposed to protect." Morrison nodded grimly, stirring sugar into his coffee with the mechanical movements of someone who had grown tired of fighting institutional windmills. "The new protocols are political theater designed to satisfy congressional committees that don't understand the first thing about combat operations. But Sarah's paying the price for their ignorance." The broader implications of the policy changes extended throughout the drone operations community at Creech, creating an atmosphere of caution and second-guessing that undermined the confidence and initiative necessary for effective combat operations. Operators became reluctant to make tactical recommendations that might be questioned during after-action reviews, and mission success rates began to decline as bureaucratic considerations took precedence over operational effectiveness. Sarah's reputation within the community remained strong, with younger operators seeking her guidance and experienced colleagues expressing frustration with the institutional response to her advocacy for operational flexibility. But she also became aware that her willingness to challenge the new protocols had marked her as a potential problem for senior leadership, limiting her career prospects and reducing her influence within the program. The personal cost of the professional struggle manifested in ways that Sarah tried to hide from her colleagues and superiors. Her sleep became increasingly troubled, filled with dreams that blended memories of successful operations with imagined scenarios where bureaucratic delays resulted in American casualties. Her weekend volunteer work at the Children's Hospital became more important as a source of meaning and human connection that balanced the frustration of her professional environment. But perhaps most challenging was the growing sense that her gender was being used as a factor in evaluating her fitness for leadership roles within the drone operations community. Comments about emotional decision-making and inappropriate attachment to tactical outcomes seemed to carry gendered implications that would never be applied to male officers who advocated for operational effectiveness. The cumulative effect of the institutional pressure was to isolate Sarah from the decision-making processes that had once defined her role, reducing her from a tactical leader to a bureaucratic functionary whose primary responsibility was compliance rather than mission success. The skills and judgment that had saved dozens of American lives were being systematically devalued in favor of procedures that prioritized political cover over operational effectiveness. As autumn progressed and the new protocols became entrenched within the drone operations community, Sarah found herself facing a career crossroads that would determine not only her professional future, but also the broader question of whether institutional change was possible within a military establishment that seemed more committed to avoiding criticism than achieving mission success. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test not only Sarah's tactical skills and professional judgment, but also her willingness to risk everything she had worked for in pursuit of the operational effectiveness that she believed was essential for protecting American lives in an increasingly complex and dangerous world. This section introduces Colonel Hayes as an antagonist representing bureaucratic oversight, shows Sarah facing institutional resistance after advocating for operational effectiveness, depicts the tragic consequences of new protocols through the Recon 7 operation, and establishes the escalating conflict between tactical reality and political considerations. The gender dynamics and professional undermining intensify as Sarah's competence is questioned despite her proven track record. The crisis that would transform Sarah Chen from a marginalized drone operator into a recognized tactical innovator began with a whispered intelligence briefing at 0347 hours on a cold December morning. Captain Morrison burst into the operations center with classified communication intercepts that painted a terrifying picture. A coordinated terrorist attack was planned for dawn, targeting a joint Afghan-American forward operating base that housed nearly 300 coalition personnel, including a visiting congressional delegation conducting oversight hearings on military effectiveness. "Sarah, you need to see this immediately," Morrison said, his usual casual demeanor replaced by urgent intensity. The intercepted communications, decoded by NSA cryptographers working through the night, revealed a sophisticated multi-pronged assault involving suicide bombers, rocket attacks, and a diversionary assault on nearby civilian infrastructure designed to draw military resources away from the main target. Sarah studied the intelligence briefings while Maria rapidly configured surveillance assets to provide real-time assessment of the developing threat. The terrorist organization had learned from previous attacks, incorporating countermeasures against drone surveillance and timing their assault to coincide with shift changes that would maximize confusion and minimize coordinated response capabilities. "We have approximately 90 minutes before the attack begins," Sarah announced after reviewing the tactical timeline. "The main assault will target the base's eastern perimeter, where congressional representatives are scheduled to tour defensive installations at sunrise." General Blackwood arrived within minutes of being notified, his gray hair still showing pillow marks and his uniform hastily assembled, but his command presence immediately filling the operations center with focused urgency. Behind him came Colonel Hayes, whose rigid adherence to protocol seemed suddenly less important when faced with an imminent threat to American lives and high-profile political visitors. "Major Chen, I need immediate assessment of our response capabilities," Blackwood ordered, moving to a position where he could observe both the tactical displays and the growing group of senior officers gathering around Sarah's command station. Sarah's fingers flew across the control interface as she coordinated surveillance assets and analyzed the terrorist force dispositions revealed by ongoing intelligence collection. The picture that emerged was sobering. At least 40 experienced fighters armed with military-grade weapons, explosives, and detailed knowledge of the base's defensive vulnerabilities. "Sir, we have 2 Reaper drones in the area, each carrying full weapon loads," Sarah reported. "The terrorists have positioned themselves in multiple locations around the base perimeter, but they're using civilian structures and terrain features that make precision strikes extremely challenging." "What about the authorization protocols?" Colonel Hayes interjected, her voice carrying the bureaucratic caution that had characterized her response to previous crises. "We'll need full clearance from the authorization board before engaging targets in populated areas." Sarah felt her professional frustration crystallizing into something approaching anger as she realized that Hayes was still prioritizing procedural compliance over the immediate threat to 300 American lives. The authorization board would require hours to convene and approve tactical responses, time that the terrorists weren't going to provide. "Ma'am, the attack begins in 87 minutes, Sarah replied, her voice carefully controlled despite her internal fury. "The authorization board can't be convened and briefed in time to prevent the attack. We need immediate tactical authorization to engage terrorist positions before they initiate their assault." "The protocols exist for good reasons, Major Chen," Hayes responded. "We cannot simply disregard established procedures because of time pressure. There must be alternatives that don't require bypassing proper authorization channels." General Blackwood had remained silent during this exchange, but Sarah could see the calculations running behind his experienced eyes as he weighed political considerations against operational necessities. The presence of congressional representatives at the target location added political complexity that made the stakes even higher than the already unacceptable prospect of massive American casualties. "General, with respect, there are no alternatives," Sarah said, stepping into the professional risk zone that had already damaged her career but might now save hundreds of lives. "The terrorists have positioned themselves to maximize civilian casualties while minimizing our response options. Traditional artillery and airstrikes would cause unacceptable collateral damage, and ground forces can't reach the target locations in time." She gestured to the tactical display showing terrorist positions scattered around the base perimeter, each group strategically located to exploit gaps in defensive coverage while using civilian infrastructure as protection against aerial attack. The sophistication of the terrorist planning was evident in their choice of positions and timing, suggesting intelligence gathering and tactical expertise that exceeded typical insurgent capabilities. "What are you proposing, Major?" Blackwood asked quietly. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might end her military career but could save American lives that would otherwise be lost to bureaucratic inflexibility. "Sir, I request immediate tactical authorization to engage terrorist positions using precision drone strikes. I can eliminate the threat without civilian casualties, but only if we act now." "That's impossible under current protocols," Hayes interjected immediately. "You cannot guarantee zero civilian casualties in an urban environment, and the political ramifications of unauthorized strikes could undermine the entire drone program." Sarah felt the familiar sense of institutional betrayal as procedural concerns took precedence over the lives of American servicemen and visiting political representatives. But this time, she was prepared to risk everything to prove that tactical excellence could overcome bureaucratic limitations. "Colonel Hayes, I've been conducting precision drone operations for 7 years," Sarah said, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised even herself. "I've eliminated 43 hostile targets without a single civilian casualty. I know what I can and cannot do with these systems." The tension in the operations center was palpable, as Sarah's challenge to institutional authority played out in front of a growing audience of officers and technicians who had gathered to monitor the developing crisis. Maria and Morrison positioned themselves to provide technical support, their body language indicating complete confidence in Sarah's tactical judgment despite the professional risks involved. "Major Chen, you are not authorized to engage targets without proper clearance," Hayes said firmly. "I will not permit unauthorized strikes that could jeopardize our strategic objectives in the region." "Then you'll be responsible for the deaths of 300 Americans," Sarah replied, her professional restraint finally giving way to the moral clarity that had always driven her military service. "Because that's what's going to happen if we don't act." General Blackwood stepped forward, his command presence filling the space between Sarah and Hayes as he made the kind of leadership decision that defined military careers and saved lives. "Major Chen, you have tactical authorization to engage terrorist targets as you deem appropriate. I'll take full responsibility for the consequences." "Sir, I must protest this violation of established protocols," Hayes began, but Blackwood cut her off with a gesture that brooked no argument. "Colonel, American lives are at stake. The protocols can be reviewed after we save the people they're supposed to protect." Sarah felt a surge of professional vindication as she received the authorization she had been seeking, but she also understood that the next hour would determine whether her confidence in her tactical abilities was justified. She turned to her control station with the focused intensity that had characterized her most successful operations, her hands moving across the interface with practiced precision. "Maria, I need targeting solutions for all terrorist positions." Morrison established direct communication with base security forces. "We're going to coordinate precision strikes with ground-based defensive measures." The next 50 minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of technology, tactical expertise, and human judgment, as Sarah systematically eliminated terrorist positions while providing real-time intelligence to coalition forces defending the base. Her first missile strike took out the terrorist command position, disrupting their coordination and buying precious time for defensive preparations. "Target eliminated, no civilian casualties," Maria reported after analyzing the strike impact. "Secondary explosions indicate the position contained significant weapons and explosives." Sarah immediately shifted her focus to the next threat, a rocket team positioned near a civilian school that had been evacuated during the night. The terrorists had chosen their location specifically to complicate American response options, betting that concerns about civilian casualties would prevent effective countermeasures. "I have a clean shot on the rocket team," Sarah announced. 37 seconds to eliminate the threat before they achieve firing position. Her second missile strike eliminated the rocket team with surgical precision, the explosion destroying the terrorists and their weapons, while leaving the school building structurally intact. Coalition forces watching from the base perimeter witnessed the kind of tactical excellence that had made Sarah's reputation, but which had been systematically undervalued by institutional policies prioritizing bureaucratic compliance over operational effectiveness. Over the next 40 minutes, Sarah eliminated 6 additional terrorist positions while coordinating with ground forces to neutralize remaining threats. Her tactical decisions were informed by real-time intelligence, cultural awareness developed through years of operating in the region, and an intuitive understanding of drone capabilities that allowed her to achieve what textbook procedures suggested was impossible. "All terrorist positions eliminated," Sarah reported as the final missile found its target. "Base security forces have secured the perimeter. Threat neutralized." The operations center erupted in spontaneous applause, as officers and technicians who had witnessed Sarah's tactical performance recognized the skill and judgment that had prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack. General Blackwood moved to her command station with an expression that combined professional admiration with personal vindication for his decision to override institutional protocols. "Outstanding work, Major," Blackwood said quietly. "You just saved 300 American lives and prevented a political disaster that could have undermined our entire mission in the region." But even as Sarah accepted congratulations from her colleagues, she was aware that Colonel Hayes remained conspicuously silent, her expression suggesting that institutional concerns about unauthorized tactical decisions might still have professional consequences despite the successful mission outcome. The immediate aftermath of the operation brought a flood of intelligence analyses, after-action reports, and political assessments that attempted to capture the significance of what Sarah and her team had accomplished. The terrorist attack had been planned for months, involved sophisticated intelligence gathering, and would have resulted in massive casualties and political embarrassment, if not for the precision drone strikes that had neutralized the threat. Hence, congressional representatives who had been potential targets of the attack were briefed on the operation during their remaining time at the base, with several expressing amazement at the technological capabilities and human expertise that had protected them from a threat they hadn't even known existed. The political implications of successful counterterrorism operations conducted by female drone operators were not lost on the visitors, who had arrived expecting to criticize military effectiveness and instead found themselves witnesses to tactical excellence. Major Chen, I want to understand exactly how you were able to achieve such precise results under those time constraints, said Representative Margaret Sullivan, a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, whose oversight role had made her a frequent critic of drone warfare policies. The briefings I received suggested that this kind of precision was theoretically possible, but practically unachievable. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of explaining her tactical methods to political leaders who had previously viewed drone operations with suspicion and skepticism. Her detailed analysis of targeting decisions, civilian casualty avoidance measures, and real-time intelligence integration provided congressional representatives with insights into the human expertise required for effective unmanned systems operations. Representative Sullivan's successful drone operations require the same tactical judgment and situational awareness as traditional combat operations, Sarah explained. The technology provides enhanced capabilities, but it's still human decision-making that determines mission success and casualty avoidance. The political impact of the successful counterterrorism operation extended far beyond the immediate tactical results, generating congressional interest in understanding how such effectiveness had been achieved and why institutional protocols had nearly prevented it. Representative Sullivan and her colleagues began asking pointed questions about authorization procedures that seemed designed to prevent, rather than enable, mission success. Colonel Hayes, I'm troubled by reports that your authorization protocols would have prevented Major Chen from responding to this terrorist threat, Sullivan said during a formal briefing session. Can you explain how bureaucratic procedures that impede effective counterterrorism operations serve American interests? Hayes found herself defending policies that had been designed to satisfy political concerns about drone warfare accountability, but which had proven inadequate for dynamic threat environments that required rapid tactical response. Her explanations about civilian casualty avoidance and strategic considerations seemed increasingly hollow when contrasted with Sarah's demonstrated ability to achieve tactical objectives without unacceptable consequences. Representative Sullivan, the protocols exist to ensure that drone operations align with broader strategic objectives and international legal requirements, Hayes replied. While Major Chen's results were positive in this instance, we cannot base policy on individual exceptional performance. Colonel, if exceptional performance is what saves American lives, perhaps we should be encouraging rather than restricting it. Sullivan responded, her tone suggesting that congressional oversight of drone operations might shift toward supporting rather than limiting operational effectiveness. The political reverberations of the successful operation continued for weeks, as congressional committees, Pentagon officials, and media representatives sought to understand the implications of tactical success achieved despite, rather than because of institutional policies. Sarah found herself briefing senior military leaders, testifying before congressional subcommittees, and providing expert analysis to policymakers who were beginning to recognize the disconnect between bureaucratic requirements and operational realities. General Blackwood used the political attention generated by the operation to advocate for reform of drone operational protocols, arguing that tactical flexibility and operator expertise were essential for effective counterterrorism operations. His support provided Sarah with protection from institutional retaliation while enabling her to influence policy discussions that had previously excluded operational perspectives. Major Chen's performance demonstrates that we have been underutilizing our most experienced operators by subjecting them to procedures designed for routine operations rather than dynamic threats. Blackwood testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. We need policies that enable rather than constrain tactical excellence. The institutional response to the successful operation and its political aftermath was complex and revealing. with some officials embracing the tactical innovations while others remained committed to bureaucratic control that prioritized procedure over performance. Colonel Hayes found herself increasingly isolated, as political support shifted toward approaches that emphasized operational effectiveness rather than administrative compliance. The Major's unauthorized actions created precedents that could undermine command authority and legal oversight, Hayes argued in internal Pentagon discussions. Success in one operation does not justify abandoning established protocols for future missions. But her arguments were increasingly overwhelmed by political and military support for Sarah's tactical approach, with congressional representatives and senior officers recognizing that bureaucratic inflexibility had nearly prevented a successful counterterrorism operation. The institutional momentum began shifting toward policies that would enable rather than constrain the kind of tactical excellence that Sarah had demonstrated. This section shows Sarah's vindication through a successful high-stakes operation, political recognition of her tactical excellence, congressional support for operational effectiveness over bureaucracy, and the beginning of institutional change driven by proven results rather than theoretical policies. 6 months after the congressional delegation incident, Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of the Pentagon for the first time in her military career, her major's insignia recently replaced with the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel following an accelerated promotion that had surprised even her most ardent supporters. The promotion ceremony had taken place in a conference room at Creech Air Force Base, with General Blackwood presiding and Representative Sullivan and 3 other congressional committee members in attendance, transforming what should have been a routine military advancement into a political statement about the value of tactical excellence over bureaucratic compliance. The Pentagon meeting had been requested by the Secretary of Defense himself, who sought Sarah's input on comprehensive reforms to drone operational procedures that would preserve tactical flexibility while maintaining appropriate oversight. Her recommendations, developed over months of consultation with operators, intelligence analysts, and legal experts, represented a fundamental reimagining of how unmanned systems could be integrated into military operations without sacrificing the human judgment that made them effective. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, your proposals represent exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to modernize our approach to asymmetric warfare, said Secretary Harrison, a former Marine general whose combat experience in Iraq and Afghanistan had given him deep appreciation for the tactical realities that operators faced. The question is whether we can implement these changes without creating new problems that undermine strategic objectives. Sarah's reform proposals were comprehensive and carefully crafted to address both operational effectiveness and legitimate oversight concerns. They included provisions for rapid authorization procedures during dynamic threat situations, enhanced training requirements for authorization board members, and performance metrics that emphasized mission success and casualty avoidance rather than procedural compliance. Mr. Secretary, the key insight from our recent operations is that tactical flexibility and appropriate oversight are not mutually exclusive, Sarah explained, gesturing to charts and analysis that documented improved outcomes when operators were given appropriate decision-making authority. When we trust experienced operators to make tactical decisions within clearly defined parameters, we achieve better results with fewer casualties. The institutional changes that followed Sarah's successful operation and subsequent policy advocacy represented a fundamental shift in how the military approached drone warfare and gender integration in combat roles. Colonel Hayes had been quietly reassigned to a logistics position that removed her from operational oversight, while several of her policy initiatives were systematically dismantled in favor of approaches that prioritized tactical effectiveness. Maria Rodriguez received a promotion to major and assignment as the Senior Technical Systems Officer for the entire Western Drone Operations Command, her expertise in multi-platform coordination becoming the foundation for next-generation surveillance and strike capabilities. Her success represented not only personal advancement but also institutional recognition that technical excellence transcended traditional gender assumptions about military roles. Captain Morrison was selected for advanced command training that would prepare him for senior leadership positions in the expanding drone warfare community, his communication skills and tactical understanding making him an ideal candidate for roles that required coordination between remote operations and traditional military units. The 3 of them had become case studies in effective military teamwork that achieved results through competence rather than adherence to conventional hierarchies. The broader changes within the drone operations community at Creech reflected a cultural shift toward merit-based advancement and tactical innovation that attracted some of the military's most capable officers regardless of gender or background. Sarah found herself leading training programs for new operators, sharing tactical knowledge and decision-making frameworks that emphasize the human elements of remote warfare, rather than treating drone operations as purely technological endeavors. The most important thing to understand about drone warfare is that you're not operating machines. You're extending your human capabilities across distance and time, Sarah told a group of newly assigned operators during one of her training sessions. Every decision you make has human consequences, and every tactical choice reflects your judgment, experience, and moral framework. Her training philosophy emphasized the integration of technical proficiency with ethical reasoning, preparing operators to make complex decisions under pressure while maintaining the moral clarity necessary for effective military service. The approach represented a significant departure from previous training methods that had focused primarily on technical systems operation rather than the human judgment required for effective tactical application. The success of Sarah's training programs and policy reforms generated interest from military leaders in other services who were grappling with similar challenges in integrating advanced technology with human decision-making. The success of Sarah's training programs and policy reforms generated interest from military leaders in other services who were grappling with similar challenges in integrating advanced technology with human decision-making. Her consultation work expanded beyond the Air Force to include Navy unmanned systems operations and Army battlefield robotics programs, establishing her as a leading authority on the human factors that determine technological effectiveness in combat environments. The personal transformation that accompanied Sarah's professional advancement was perhaps even more significant than her institutional impact. The confidence that had been systematically undermined by months of bureaucratic resistance was restored through recognition that her tactical judgment and moral reasoning represented exactly the kind of leadership the military needed for 21st-century challenges. Her relationship with her parents had evolved as they came to understand the broader significance of her military service and the positive changes she was implementing within the defense establishment. Dr. Michael Chen had initially struggled with the moral complexities of his daughter's role in remote warfare, but he came to appreciate the precision and care she brought to life-and-death decisions that paralleled his own experience as a cardiovascular surgeon. Hoktav, Sarah, what you're doing requires the same kind of focused judgment and ethical reasoning that we use in medicine, her father said during one of their monthly phone conversations. You're saving lives through precise application of technology and human expertise, just in a different context than we anticipated when you were growing up. Her mother, Dr. Lisa Chen, had become one of Sarah's most ardent supporters, frequently citing her daughter's achievements during medical conferences where discussions of women in high-stakes professional roles remained relevant despite decades of progress. The pediatrician's perspective on protecting vulnerable populations resonated strongly with Sarah's approach to minimizing civilian casualties while achieving tactical objectives. The professional recognition that followed Sarah's successful operations and policy reforms extended beyond military circles to include academic institutions, think tanks, and international organizations studying the evolution of warfare in the digital age. Her speaking engagements at universities and policy conferences provided opportunities to influence the next generation of leaders who would inherit responsibility for managing technological capabilities that were advancing faster than institutional frameworks could adapt. The fundamental challenge of modern warfare is maintaining human agency and moral reasoning in environments where technology enables capabilities that previous generations could never have imagined, Sarah told an audience at Georgetown University's Security Studies program. We have to ensure that advanced capabilities serve human purposes rather than becoming substitutes for human judgment. Her academic presentations emphasized the importance of integrating technological capabilities with human wisdom, arguing that the most dangerous aspect of advanced military systems was not their destructive potential, but rather the possibility that bureaucratic processes might replace the human judgment necessary for their ethical application. The institutional changes Sarah had helped implement at Creech Air Force Base became models for similar reforms throughout the military, with other commands adopting modified versions of her tactical flexibility protocols and performance-based evaluation systems. The success of these programs generated data demonstrating improved mission outcomes, reduced casualties, and enhanced operator satisfaction that provided empirical support for policies emphasizing human expertise over bureaucratic control. General Blackwood received his 4th star and appointment as commander of Air Force Global Strike Command, a position that enabled him to implement Sarah's reforms throughout the service's strategic and tactical aviation community. His leadership style, influenced by the lessons learned during Sarah's struggle with institutional resistance, emphasized supporting exceptional performers rather than constraining them through excessive oversight. Lieutenant Colonel Chen taught me that our job as senior leaders is to enable excellence rather than manage risk, Blackwood reflected during his promotion ceremony. When we trust competent people to do their jobs effectively, we achieve results that exceed what any bureaucratic process could produce. The ripple effects of institutional reform extended beyond immediate operational improvements to influence broader discussions about gender integration, technological ethics, and leadership development within the military establishment. Sarah's success became a case study in how individual excellence could drive systemic change when supported by leaders willing to challenge conventional assumptions about capability and authority. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of Sarah's transformation was the restoration of her sense of purpose and professional satisfaction that had been damaged by months of institutional resistance. She approached each day's responsibilities with renewed enthusiasm for the complex challenges of modern military service, confident that her contributions were valued and that her expertise would be utilized effectively. Her weekend volunteer work at the Las Vegas Children's Hospital continued, but it had evolved from a psychological coping mechanism into a source of inspiration that informed her professional responsibilities. The children she worked with reminded her of the human stakes involved in every tactical decision, reinforcing her commitment to precision and care in all aspects of her military service. The small bonsai tree in her apartment had grown significantly over the past year, its careful cultivation paralleling the patience and attention required for the institutional changes she had helped implement. The daily ritual of caring for the plant provided a meditative practice that balanced the high-stress demands of her expanded responsibilities while maintaining the disciplined focus that characterized her approach to both personal and professional challenges. 2 years after the congressional delegation incident, Sarah found herself testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee as part of routine oversight hearings on military effectiveness and technological innovation. But unlike her previous congressional appearances, which had focused on specific operational successes, this testimony addressed broader questions about the future of warfare and the human factors that would determine whether advanced capabilities served constructive or destructive purposes. Senators, the lesson we've learned from recent operations is that technology amplifies human capabilities rather than replacing them, Sarah explained to the committee. The most sophisticated drone systems in the world are only as effective as the human judgment that guides their application. Her testimony emphasized the importance of investing in human development alongside technological advancement, arguing that the most critical military capabilities for future conflicts would be the wisdom, creativity, and moral reasoning that enabled appropriate use of powerful tools rather than the tools themselves. The question isn't whether we can build systems that are faster, more precise, or more autonomous, Sarah continued. The question is whether we can develop leaders who have the judgment and character to use those systems in ways that protect, rather than threaten, the values we're trying to defend. The senators' questions revealed sophisticated understanding of the challenges Sarah had faced and overcome, with several committee members referencing her experiences as examples of how institutional flexibility could enhance rather than compromise military effectiveness. The political support for her approach had solidified into bipartisan recognition that tactical innovation required organizational cultures that supported, rather than constrained, exceptional performance. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee's ranking minority member, posed a question that captured the broader significance of Sarah's professional journey. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, what advice would you give to young women considering military service in fields where they might face skepticism about their capabilities? Sarah's response reflected both her personal experience and her broader understanding of how individual excellence could influence institutional change. Senator, my advice would be to focus on developing genuine competence in areas that matter, to find mentors and colleagues who value performance over preconceptions, and to remember that proving yourself once is often not enough. You have to be prepared to prove yourself repeatedly until the institution catches up with reality. The hearing concluded with committee members expressing strong support for continued investment in the kind of human-centered approach to technological development that Sarah's reforms had demonstrated. Her testimony would become part of the congressional record, providing a foundation for future policy discussions about military effectiveness and gender integration. 3 months later, Sarah received notification of her selection for the Army War College, the military's premier professional development program for officers destined for senior leadership positions. The opportunity represented recognition that her tactical expertise and institutional reform experience made her a candidate for the kind of strategic responsibilities that would shape military policy for decades to come. The evening before departing for Pennsylvania and the next phase of her military career, Sarah stood in her apartment looking at the bonsai tree that had accompanied her through 7 years of professional challenges and personal growth. The small plant had thrived under careful attention, its intricate structure reflecting the patience and precision that had defined her approach to both cultivation and military service. Hiwa. As she prepared for advanced education that would prepare her for senior leadership roles, Sarah reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a marginalized drone operator into a recognized authority on the integration of technology and human judgment in military operations. The challenges she had faced and overcome had strengthened rather than discouraged her, providing insights and capabilities that would inform her contributions to the military's evolution in an increasingly complex world. The institutional changes she had helped implement at Creech Air Force Base had become permanent features of drone operations throughout the military, with her tactical flexibility protocols and performance-based evaluation systems serving as models for other commands grappling with similar challenges. The success of these reforms provided empirical evidence that supporting exceptional performers could enhance rather than compromise military effectiveness. But beyond the institutional impact, Sarah's professional journey had demonstrated that individual excellence and moral courage could influence systemic change even within large bureaucratic organizations resistant to innovation. Her willingness to risk her career in pursuit of operational effectiveness had created opportunities for others, while proving that competence and character were more important than conventional assumptions about capability and authority. As she locked her apartment and prepared to drive across the country to begin the next phase of her military education, Sarah carried with her the confidence that came from having proven herself under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The young woman who had once doubted whether her voice would be heard within the military establishment had become a leader whose insights were sought by the highest levels of defense leadership. The road ahead would present new challenges and opportunities to influence the military's adaptation to 21st century realities, but Sarah approached those prospects with the calm assurance that came from having already demonstrated that excellence and integrity could overcome institutional resistance and cultural barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. 5 years later, Colonel Sarah Chen stood in the Pentagon's briefing room addressing a joint session of military leaders, congressional representatives, and international allies gathered to discuss the next generation of autonomous warfare systems. Her silver eagles caught the fluorescent light as she gestured toward displays, showing global deployment statistics that demonstrated how her operational reforms had been adopted by allied nations, seeking to improve their own unmanned systems capabilities. The briefing room contained representatives from 12 countries, each seeking to understand how the American military had achieved unprecedented effectiveness in drone operations, while maintaining ethical standards that had garnered international approval. Sarah's presentation focused on the human-centered approach to technological integration that had emerged from her experiences at Creech Air Force Base and had since become the foundation for NATO's cooperative unmanned systems protocols. Ladies and gentlemen, the data clearly demonstrates that when we prioritize human judgment and tactical flexibility within appropriate oversight frameworks, we achieve superior operational outcomes with significantly reduced civilian casualties, Sarah explained, referencing charts that showed dramatic improvements in mission success rates across multiple theaters of operation. Her audience included General Marcus Blackwood, now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, whose support had been instrumental in transforming isolated reforms into comprehensive institutional change. Beside him sat Representative Margaret Sullivan, who had been re-elected for her 6th term, partly based on her advocacy for military innovation and effectiveness, and who now chaired the House Armed Services Committee with authority to influence defense policy for years to come. The statistical evidence Sarah presented was overwhelming. Drone operations conducted under her reformed protocols had achieved a 34% improvement in mission success rates, while reducing civilian casualties by 67% compared to operations conducted under previous bureaucratic frameworks. The human and financial costs of military operations had decreased significantly, while strategic objectives were being achieved more consistently and with greater international support. Yakari. The key insight that emerged from our operational experience is that technological capabilities are most effective when they enhance rather than replace human decision-making, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the authority that came from having proven her theories under the most challenging combat conditions. Advanced systems provide better information and more precise capabilities, but they require experienced operators with sound judgment to achieve optimal results. Her presentation emphasized the broader implications of human-centered technological development for military organizations, grappling with rapid advances in artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and cyber warfare capabilities. The lessons learned from drone operations had applications for every aspect of modern military service, from logistics and intelligence to strategic planning and international cooperation. Major Maria Rodriguez, now serving as Sarah's Deputy Director for Technological Integration, provided technical analysis demonstrating how operator training programs based on Sarah's principles had produced measurable improvements in system performance and mission outcomes. Maria's research had become the foundation for military technology education programs throughout the defense establishment. Colonel Chen's emphasis on human judgment and ethical reasoning has created a generation of operators who view technology as a tool for achieving moral objectives, rather than a substitute for moral reasoning. Maria explained to the international audience, "This approach has enhanced both effectiveness and legitimacy of American military operations." Captain Morrison, recently promoted to major and serving as Chief of Staff for the Pentagon's Unmanned Systems Coordination Office, presented data on the institutional changes that had followed Sarah's initial reforms. The bureaucratic obstacles that had once prevented effective tactical response had been systematically eliminated, while maintaining appropriate oversight through streamlined procedures that emphasized competence over compliance. The organizational culture changes implemented based on Colonel Chen's recommendations have created environments where exceptional performance is supported and encouraged rather than constrained by excessive oversight, Morrison reported. This has resulted in improved retention of experienced operators and enhanced innovation throughout the unmanned systems community. The international representatives posed sophisticated questions about adapting American reforms to different cultural and legal contexts, with several allies expressing interest in implementing modified versions of Sarah's protocols within their own military establishments. The discussion revealed how tactical innovations developed at a single Air Force base had influenced military thinking throughout the democratic world. Colonel Chen, how do you recommend that allied nations balance the tactical flexibility your reforms require with the political oversight that democratic societies expect from military operations? Asked General Sir Michael Harrison, the British representative whose own experiences with drone operations had convinced him of the need for institutional reform. Sarah's response reflected years of experience navigating the complex relationship between military effectiveness and political accountability. General, the key is to ensure that oversight mechanisms are designed by people who understand operational realities rather than by those who view military operations primarily as political or legal abstractions. When oversight serves to enable rather than constrain competent performance, it enhances both effectiveness and legitimacy. The discussion continued for 2 hours, with representatives from different nations sharing their own experiences with technological integration and institutional reform. Sarah's influence on the broader evolution of military thinking was evident in the sophisticated understanding of human technology integration that characterized the international dialogue. As the formal briefing concluded, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a marginalized drone operator to a position where her insights influenced military policy on a global scale. The personal and professional transformation had required not only tactical competence, but also moral courage to challenge institutional assumptions that had seemed immutable but had proven to be simply entrenched. 10 years later, Brigadier General Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of the National Defense University, where she now served as Dean of Strategic Studies, responsible for educating the next generation of military leaders who would inherit responsibility for defending democratic values in an increasingly complex world. Her single star reflected recognition not only of her tactical achievements, but also of her intellectual contributions to military theory and practice. The university's Strategic Studies program had become the premier destination for officers seeking to understand the relationship between technological capability and strategic effectiveness. With Sarah's courses on human-centered warfare drawing students from every branch of the American military and numerous allied nations, her textbook, Technology and Judgment, The Human Element in Modern Warfare, had become required reading at military academies worldwide. Her office overlooked the Potomac River, providing a peaceful view that contrasted sharply with the complex global challenges that occupied most of her professional attention. The walls displayed photographs from her operational career alongside academic honors and international recognition for her contributions to military ethics and effectiveness. The morning's schedule included a video conference with former students now serving in senior positions throughout the military, followed by meetings with doctoral candidates researching applications of her theories to emerging technologies like quantum computing and advanced artificial intelligence. The intellectual challenges of academic leadership provided different but equally satisfying professional fulfillment compared to her years as an operational commander. Maria Rodriguez, now a lieutenant colonel serving as Director of Technology Integration for Space Force, remained one of Sarah's closest professional collaborators, despite their different career paths. Their monthly conversations provided opportunities to discuss how technological developments were creating new challenges for the human-centered approach they had pioneered during their years at Creech Air Force Base. Sarah, the artificial intelligence systems we're developing are raising questions about automation that go far beyond what we dealt with in drone operations, Maria explained during their latest conversation. These systems can process information and identify patterns at speeds that exceed human cognitive capabilities, but they still require human judgment for ethical application. Sarah's response reflected years of thinking about the relationship between human judgment and technological capability. Maria, the principles remain the same even as the technology becomes more sophisticated. The more powerful our tools become, the more important it is to ensure they're guided by human wisdom and moral reasoning. Captain Morrison, now Colonel Morrison and serving as Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense, had become one of the Pentagon's leading authorities on civil-military relations and the political dimensions of military innovation. His communication skills and understanding of both operational and political requirements made him an invaluable bridge between military effectiveness and democratic accountability. The three of them had maintained their professional relationship and personal friendship through more than a decade of career advancement, serving as mutual mentors and advisors as they navigated increasingly complex responsibilities. Their shared experience of proving that competence and character could overcome institutional resistance had created bonds that transcended typical military relationships. The most important thing we learned during those early years was that individual excellence can influence institutional change when it's supported by leaders who value performance over preconceptions, Sarah reflected during one of their periodic reunions. That lesson applies to every aspect of military service, regardless of technology or circumstances. Her personal life had evolved along with her professional responsibilities, with a marriage to Dr. James Patterson, a fellow National Defense University faculty member who specialized in international relations and understood the demands of military academic careers. Their relationship was built on shared intellectual interests and mutual respect for the challenges of military service in democratic societies. They had 2 children, 8-year-old Michael, named after Sarah's father, and 6-year-old Lisa, named after her mother. Both children were growing up with sophisticated understanding of military service and international affairs, frequently overhearing dinner table conversations about global security challenges and the role of American leadership in maintaining international stability. Sarah's parents had retired from their medical practices but remained active in professional organizations focused on healthcare access and quality improvement. They had come to understand their daughter's military career as an extension of their own commitment to protecting and improving human welfare, recognizing that the precision and ethical reasoning required for effective military service paralleled the skills they had developed as physicians. What you've accomplished in the military represents the same kind of dedication to protecting life and preventing suffering that we tried to achieve in medicine, Dr. Michael Chen had told his daughter during her promotion ceremony to Brigadier General. You've found ways to use technology and expertise to save lives rather than simply to destroy enemies. The institutional changes Sarah had initiated during her years as a drone operator had become permanent features of American military doctrine, with her human-centered approach to technological integration influencing everything from cyber warfare to space operations. The success of these reforms had generated international interest that positioned American military education and training as models for allied nations seeking to modernize their own capabilities. 15 years later, Major General Sarah Chen stood before the United Nations Security Council, addressing an emergency session called to discuss international protocols for autonomous weapon systems and artificial intelligence applications in military operations. Her 2 stars reflected recognition as one of the world's leading authorities on the ethical integration of advanced technology with human decision-making in warfare. The Security Council chamber contained representatives from every major military power, each grappling with challenges posed by technological developments that were advancing faster than international law or institutional frameworks could adapt. Sarah's presentation focused on principles derived from 15 years of experience implementing human-centered approaches to military innovation. Honorable representatives, the fundamental question facing the international community is not whether these technologies will be developed and deployed, but whether they will be guided by human wisdom and ethical reasoning or by algorithmic processes that lack moral judgment, Sarah explained to the assembled diplomats and military leaders. Her recommendations for international protocols emphasized the importance of maintaining human oversight and decision-making authority, even as technological capabilities became more sophisticated and autonomous. The principles she advocated had emerged from tactical experiences at a single Air Force base, but had proven applicable to the broadest challenges of international security and arms control. The Chinese representative posed a question that captured the central tension of the discussion. General Chen, how can democratic societies maintain technological competitiveness while preserving the human oversight you advocate? Authoritarian systems may be willing to delegate more authority to autonomous systems in pursuit of operational advantages. Sarah's response reflected both her military experience and her academic understanding of strategic competition. Honorable Representative, our experience demonstrates that human-centered approaches to technology actually enhance rather than constrain operational effectiveness. Systems guided by experienced human judgment achieve better results than those operating under purely algorithmic control. The Security Council session concluded with unanimous adoption of preliminary protocols based on Sarah's recommendations, establishing international frameworks for human oversight of autonomous military systems. The agreement represented the kind of multilateral cooperation that had become increasingly rare in global affairs, but which Sarah's reputation for competence and integrity had helped facilitate. 20 years later, General Sarah Chen, now serving as the first female chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, concluded her final Pentagon briefing before retiring from military service after 30 years of defending American interests and advancing the profession of arms. Her 4 stars reflected recognition as one of the most influential military leaders of her generation, whose innovations in human technology integration had shaped military doctrine worldwide. The briefing room contained President Elizabeth Warren, Secretary of Defense Patricia Martinez, and senior military leaders from every service branch. The discussion focused on Sarah's assessment of global security challenges and recommendations for maintaining American military effectiveness in an era of rapid technological change and great power competition. Madam President, the lesson of the past 20 years is that technological superiority alone is insufficient for strategic success, Sarah explained during her final official presentation. Military effectiveness depends on the judgment, creativity, and moral reasoning of the human beings who guide and apply technological capabilities. Her retirement ceremony took place at Arlington National Cemetery, with thousands of current and former military personnel gathered to honor a career that had transformed both individual lives and institutional practices. The speakers included every living former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, multiple heads of state, and dozens of officers whose careers had been influenced by Sarah's mentorship and example. President Warren's remarks captured the significance of Sarah's contributions. General Chen's career demonstrates that individual excellence and moral courage can influence the course of history. Her innovations in military doctrine and leadership have enhanced the security of democratic societies worldwide while maintaining the ethical standards that define our values. The final speaker was Maria Rodriguez, now a retired 3-star general who had served as Chief of Staff of the Space Force before pursuing a second career in aerospace engineering. Her remarks focused on the personal relationships and professional bonds that had enabled institutional change. Sarah taught us that competence and character could overcome any obstacle, whether technological, institutional, or cultural, Maria told the assembled crowd. Her legacy lives on in every officer who refuses to accept that excellence must be constrained by conventional assumptions about capability and authority. As the ceremony concluded and Sarah was presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her lifetime of service, she reflected on the journey that had begun with a young woman wondering whether her voice would be heard within the military establishment. The path had required not only tactical competence but also moral courage to challenge assumptions that had seemed immutable but had proven to be simply entrenched. The bonsai tree from her apartment at Creech Air Force Base now occupied a place of honor in her retirement home overlooking the Chesapeake Bay, its carefully cultivated structure reflecting 30 years of patient attention and disciplined care. The daily ritual of tending the plant continued to provide the meditative practice that had sustained her through decades of high-stress leadership responsibilities. Her memoir, The Human Element, Technology, Leadership, and the Future of Warfare, would be published the following month by Yale University Press, providing her final contribution to the ongoing dialogue about military effectiveness and democratic values. The book combined personal narrative with strategic analysis, offering insights into how individual decisions could influence institutional change and international security. As Sarah stood on her deck watching the sun set over the bay, she carried with her the satisfaction of having proven that excellence and integrity could triumph over skepticism and institutional resistance. The young drone operator, who had once been told that precision warfare was man's work, had become the architect of human-centered approaches to military innovation that enhanced both effectiveness and legitimacy of democratic military forces. The ripple effects of her career would continue for generations, influencing military doctrine, international law, and the ongoing evolution of warfare in democratic societies. But perhaps most importantly, she had demonstrated that individual competence and moral courage could overcome any obstacle, providing inspiration for future generations of military leaders who would inherit responsibility for defending freedom in an uncertain world. 5 years after retirement, Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving as a distinguished professor at Georgetown University's Security Studies program, concluded her final lecture of the semester to a classroom filled with graduate students from around the world. Her course on technology and human judgment in international security had become one of the most sought-after classes in the program, with students competing for admission to learn from someone whose theoretical insights had emerged from real-world experience at the highest levels of military leadership. "The most important lesson I can leave you with is that technology is never neutral," Sarah told her students during her concluding remarks. "Every system, every algorithm, every autonomous capability reflects the values and judgments of the human beings who create and deploy it. Your responsibility as future leaders is to ensure that those values serve rather than undermine the human purposes that technology should enable." The questions from her students reflected sophisticated understanding of the challenges facing democratic societies in an era of rapid technological change and authoritarian competition. Their engagement with complex ethical and strategic issues provided Sarah with confidence that the next generation of leaders would build upon, rather than abandon, the human-centered approaches to innovation that had defined her career. As she walked across Georgetown's campus toward her car, Sarah reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a young engineer seeking to serve her country into a global authority on the integration of technology and human judgment in military affairs. The path had required not only professional competence, but also personal courage to challenge institutional assumptions and cultural barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Maria Rodriguez, now serving as CEO of a major aerospace company developing next-generation autonomous systems. "Sarah, just wanted you to know that our latest drone design incorporates the human oversight protocols you developed 25 years ago. Your influence continues to shape how we think about technology and responsibility." The message brought a smile to Sarah's face as she realized that the principles she had fought to establish during her early years as a drone operator had become so fundamental to military thinking that they were now taken for granted by engineers and operators who had never known alternative approaches. The institutional changes that had once required moral courage to advocate had become accepted wisdom that guided technological development throughout the defense industry. As she drove home through the Virginia countryside toward the Chesapeake Bay house where she now spent her retirement writing, teaching, and tending her expanded collection of bonsai trees, Sarah carried with her the deep satisfaction of having helped create a more effective and ethical approach to military service that honored both technological capability and human wisdom. Hey! The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of countless sunsets viewed from drone operation centers around the world, where she had learned that the most sophisticated technology was only as effective as the human judgment that guided its application. The young woman who had once wondered whether her contributions would be recognized had become a leader whose influence would endure for generations of military professionals committed to defending freedom through excellence, integrity, and unwavering dedication to the values that made democratic societies worth protecting. Subscribe to Strategic Insight, where silence is never forgotten.